31 years ago, R.Kelly was a budding R&B artist from Chicago. He was in his mid-20s and he had just signed into his first major record album. But it was around this same time that he also began having inappropriate acts with a 15-year-old girl that he ultimately married. Okay, the accusations mounted over the decades and they grew increasingly heinous. They were spilled over into the public view, but still the singer who became a superstar leaned on his fame just to mask the predator that he really was. And he also used these things to shield himself from any of the consequences that he knew would come. But on Wednesday, yesterday, June the 29th of 2022, Mr. Kelly, who is now 55 years old, could no longer escape this. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison for racketeering and sex trafficking. As the judge read out his term, he did not re-sentencing followed the September conviction of Mr. Kelly's staggering downfall from a chart-topping hitmaker known as the King of R&B to a predator. His trial exposed horrific torment directed by him and enabled by those around him. The U.S. District Judge Ann M. Donnelly, who presided over the federal trial in Brooklyn, she told Mr. Kelly in her own words, quote, "You taught them that love is enslavement and violence," end quote. The judge went on to say, "This case is not about sex. It's about violence and cruelty and control. You had a system in place that lured young girls into your orbit, and then you took over their lives." Mr. Kelly's lawyer, Jennifer Bonjean, said outside of the courthouse that she would appeal the sentence. She has sought 10 years. Mr. Kelly was prepared for prison, she said, but he does have regrets and he is sad. For an hour in court on Wednesday, 7 women and one of their fathers delivered wrenching accounts describing the devastation of their sense of self-worth and how the trauma continues to touch every facet in their lives. One woman, known in court only by the name of Jane Doe No. 2, said that she had sex with the entertainer in 1999 when she was 17 years old. She said she still often finds herself sobbing uncontrollably at random times of the day. She said, "I was a teenager and you were a pedophile ready to ruin another young girl's life. You made me do things that broke me. I literally wish that I could die because of how you made me feel. I don't know if I'll ever be whole. What you did was left a permanent stain on my life that I will never be able to wash away. I'm sure you never even think about that." After the women told their stories, Mr. Kelly declined to speak. He still faces an August the 15th trial in Chicago on federal charges of producing child pornography and luring minors into sex acts. #MeToo movement had coincided with a protest campaign against his music, a troubling Lifetime documentary on his treatment of women, and the new accusations of accusers and their families. This time, the scrutiny was just too much for him to hide from. On Wednesday, the women in court said that this movement was long overdue. "We are no longer the preyed upon individuals that we once were. We will be able to live again." Kelly's attorney argued that the government's portrayal of Mr. Kelly as a one-dimensional predator and an evil monster was misguided, and that he endured childhood traumas, including his own essay. Starting at around the age of 6, she said the singer was molested, sometimes on a weekly basis. She went on to say that it was not an excuse, but it is a consideration. Indeed, the judge considered this in the trial evidence in her decision. The government called 45 witnesses, including 11 victims, who very painfully remembered R. Kelly's brutality. Jurors were also confronted with hours and hours of audio and video recording. One of 2 men who testified said that they were essayed by Mr. Kelly, and they recalled a moment when he was at the singer's home gym in Illinois. Mr. Kelly snapped his fingers twice, and a young lady crawled out from under a boxing ring to perform acts on him. I will never forget that, the judge said about everything she had heard. She added that she was baffled by the hundreds of enablers who surrounded the singer, saying that, quote, "I don't know why all these people just turned a blind eye," end quote. She also ordered R.Kelly to pay a $100,000 fine. But see, everyone knew about these accusations, so why did it take 30 years to get justice? The documentary series, Surviving R.Kelly, it was released in 2019, and it really became the catalyst for the singer's trial in New York, and it ultimately led to him being found guilty on the charges that were brought against him. So rumors and allegations about R. Kelly date back almost to the beginning of his career, and yet he still rose to become a chart-topping Grammy-winning artist. But there was criminal details of his marriage to Aaliyah in 1994. She was only 15 years old and he was 27. Now this was detailed in open court, and a former tour manager admitting that he bribed an official to get a fake ID in order for the ceremony to just go ahead. This had always been a well-known secret, and in 2002, Kelly was charged with 21 accounts of making indecent images of children. And then, after years of delay to his trial, the singer was acquitted, but the allegations never went away. Claims made over the years were silenced and brushed under the table by an industry that wanted to keep the money rolling in, and the fans did not want to believe that R. Kelly could have committed the crimes that he was accused of. The world wanted to hear his music, so his unknown accusers were very easy to ignore. A reporter came out and said, "I always felt I was late to the story when my partner and I did the first investigative report." He says that it had been going on already for 9 years, and we never thought when that paper came out that this would still be going on. Just over a year later, after this reporter said this, he was sent an anonymous videotape. This was in an envelope with a VHS cassette. No markings on either the envelope or the VHS. The contents of the tape, he says, were horrifying. It was 26 minutes and 39 seconds, showing Kelly very clearly having sexual contact with a 14-year-old girl, even urinating in her mouth at one point. This tape led to the 2002 charges and the delayed trial in 2008. But Kelly was acquitted, and he continued to prey on young girls. He thought he was untouchable, and he had this huge sense of ego. He was silencing victims with money. But the most shocking thing about this case is the time frame, and how he was allowed to get away with what he was doing just because of his fame. See, during that time, he was selling 100 million albums of his own. And this was a cash machine for the music industry, and they were well aware of his behavior and never actually acted to stop it at all. There were police officers who purposely tried to stop his predatory behavior. But you know, until Surviving R.Kelly brought these women into people's living rooms in America, and they saw woman after woman after woman. 12 different women appeared on camera telling their stories. They cannot all be liars. So why did justice take so long? The spotlight is also firmly on those who at best turned a blind eye and at worst enabled him. Charging the singer with racketeering meant prosecutors set out to show him as the leader of an enterprise where managers, bodyguards, drivers, personal assistants, and runners were all complicit in recruiting women and girls to have sex with R. Kelly. And others also agree that while Kelly was at the top of the pyramid, there is still a lot of blame to go around. The racketeering statute is generally only used against mob bosses or drug kingpins. We only have one person indicted. How are you a criminal enterprise if no one else in your alleged enterprise is being held to account? I fully agree that R.Kelly is one disgusting human being. He is a predator, and he's been doing this for years. And just as has been said, he did use his fame and power to be able to get by with this for 30 years that we know of. It was also mentioned that R.Kelly had a troubled childhood as well. There is an old saying, the best way to predict the future is study the past. And it's not always the case. People do break the cycles of horrific, traumatic childhoods, but then there are those that just continue the cycle. I believe that is the case here with R.Kelly. And it may be very unpopular, but I have to say it. Some of these girls were 13, 14, 15 years old. Where were their parents? How could this happen? Thank you all so much for listening. And until next time, this is Unjustified.